Niccolò Machiavelli taught that power isn't about what you say, but about what you can make others reveal. He understood that the person asking the questions controls the conversation, the narrative, and ultimately the outcome. The person answering is a resource, giving away information, leverage, and power with every word. Most people spend their lives answering, talking, explaining themselves, believing that transparency is a virtue. But in the world of consequence, transparency is a liability. It's an invitation to be exploited. I learned this the hard way during a negotiation for my first company. I was sitting across from a potential investor, a man named Julian. He had this incredible warmth, a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He didn't talk much about himself. Instead, he asked questions. They seemed innocent, almost therapeutic. "What are you most afraid of with this venture, Leo? Not the business plan, I mean you, personally. What was the moment you first knew this idea was the one? Tell me about the people who doubted you." I confess it felt good to be heard. I was young, full of passion, and a desperate need for validation. So I talked. I told him about my fears of letting my team down, my burning desire to prove my old boss wrong, my deep-seated belief that my idea would change the world. I laid my soul bare on that polished mahogany table. I thought I was building a relationship. I was actually handing him the keys to my entire psychological operating system. I didn't realize that every vulnerability I shared was a future weapon he could use against me. He wasn't investing in my company. He was mapping my mind for weaknesses. He was the strategist, and I was the subject. We are taught to be open, to be authentic, to connect. But what if that very instinct is the thing that makes us easy targets? What if the only way to protect your dreams, your work, and your sanity is to first learn how to become a fortress? What if the only way to stay kind is to become strong first? The change was subtle. In our next meeting, Julian's warmth was still there, but it now had an edge. Machiavelli advises that a prince must know how to use both the beast and the man. Julian had shown me the man. Now, the beast was beginning to stir. He started using my own words, my own fears, to corner me. When I hesitated on a particularly harsh term in the contract, he leaned back and said with a sympathetic smile, "Look, Leo, I know you're afraid of letting your team down. This deal secures their future. Isn't that more important than a little control?" He was using the vulnerability I had gifted him to frame his predatory terms as a form of protection. This is the art of psychological warfare. It isn't loud or aggressive. It's quiet, precise, and devastating. It's turning your opponent's emotional landscape into a minefield that only you have the map to. I remember watching a documentary about interrogators. They don't get information by shouting. They get it by creating a false sense of intimacy, asking questions that seem to show empathy, but are actually designed to probe for emotional fractures. The subject, starved for connection, begins to talk. They reveal a weakness, a fear, a past regret. And once that crack appears, the interrogator applies pressure. Julian was doing the same to me. He made me feel seen, then used what he saw to blind me. Have you ever been in a situation like that, where someone listens so intently that you feel compelled to share more, only to realize later that you were the only one sharing? It's a deeply unsettling feeling, the slow dawning horror that you've been completely outmaneuvered. You feel naive, foolish, and angry at yourself. This is the battlefield where most modern power struggles are fought, not in boardrooms with spreadsheets, but in the quiet spaces between words, where one person's emotional intelligence is weaponized against another's emotional need. I was losing badly. He had all the information, and I had none. He knew my weaknesses, my motivations, my deepest fears. I knew only one thing about him. He was good at asking questions. I was playing checkers while he was playing three-dimensional chess. I realized if I continued playing his game, answering his questions, I would lose everything. The trap was set. My only way out was to stop being the prey and start learning from the predator. The pressure was escalating. The deadline to sign the term sheet was approaching, and with every conversation, Julian tightened his grip. He had positioned himself as the benevolent mentor, the only one who truly understood my vision and my struggles. To my own team, he was the savior. To me, he was the warden of a prison he had convinced me to help build. He'd use my desire to prove my doubters wrong by saying, "Think of their faces when we announce this. Don't let pride get in the way of that moment." He was a master at framing his interests as the fulfillment of my emotional needs. This is a tactic straight out of the political playbook. A ruler, Machiavelli notes, must appear to be all mercy, faith, and humanity, while being prepared to act contrary to them. Julian was the picture of a supportive partner, all while drafting clauses that would strip me of my authority and equity. It's the same game played in toxic relationships, where one partner uses the other's insecurities to maintain control. "No one will ever understand you the way I do" is a statement of intimacy, but it's also a threat, a cage disguised as a sanctuary. What would you do in that scenario? Walk away and lose the only investment offer on the table, likely causing your company to collapse? Or sign the deal, sacrificing your power and autonomy for the illusion of success? I was trapped between financial ruin and personal servitude. My own emotional honesty had become the raw material for my chains. For days, I was paralyzed. I replayed every conversation, every question he had asked, every answer I had given. I felt like a fool, but then the anger and shame began to curdle into something else, clarity. He had a blueprint of my mind, but I had nothing on his. He had made me reveal everything, and he had revealed nothing. His strength was his questions. His power came from what I was willing to give away. That was it. The game wasn't about the terms on the paper. The game was about the flow of information. He had opened the floodgates on my side and built a dam on his. I had been playing the game all wrong. I wasn't there to answer questions. I was there to win. And to do that, I had to stop talking and start listening. I had to learn how to ask my own damn questions. The night before our final meeting, I didn't sleep. I wasn't preparing a counteroffer. I was preparing an attack. Not on his business terms, but on his composure. My only advantage was that he saw me as a naive artist, an open book. He would never expect me to use his own strategy against him. Machiavelli wrote that the best deception is the one your enemy is most willing to believe. Julian believed I was an emotional, predictable player. That was the mask I would wear as I sharpened my knife. We sat down in the same room, but the energy was different. I was quiet. He started with his usual warm, disarming questions, but this time I didn't take the bait. I gave short, simple answers. Then, in a moment of silence, I looked at him and changed the game. I asked, "Julian, you've built an incredible reputation, but what's the one deal you regret losing the most? Not financially, but the one that left a mark on you, the one you can't forget." The question hung in the air. It was personal, emotional, and completely unexpected. It was his move, but I was making it. He was visibly taken aback. For the first time, his mask of calm control slipped. He paused, and in that pause, I saw it, a flicker of something real. He mentioned a biotech company he'd passed on years ago that later became a unicorn. He tried to frame it as a simple business miscalculation, but his body language told a different story. A slight tightening in his jaw, a quick glance away. He wasn't just talking about money. He was talking about a loss that stung his pride. I let the silence sit. Then I leaned in, just as he always did with me. "That's fascinating," I said softly. "What does a man like you do when he knows he's about to make a mistake, but is too committed to pull back?" This wasn't a real question. It was a psychological probe designed to bypass his logic and hit his ego. I was mirroring his tactics, but with a crucial difference. I wasn't looking for information to connect with him. I was looking for the fault line. He started to talk about the importance of decisiveness, but his speech was rushed. He was on the defensive. The hunter had become the hunted. Then I delivered the final blow. I looked him dead in the eye and asked, "What's your most hidden weakness, Julian? The one only someone truly special could ever find." The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because the question itself was the message. I see you. I know you have a mask, and I'm not afraid to pull it off. The power had shifted. He was no longer the interrogator. He was the one being exposed. In that final heavy silence, the entire negotiation was rewritten. Julian's carefully constructed persona of the all-knowing, untouchable investor had shattered. He was just a man, full of the same pride, fear, and insecurity as anyone else. My question about his hidden weakness wasn't meant to be answered. It was meant to demonstrate that I was no longer playing his game. I was now a player in my own right, one who understood that true leverage isn't found in a spreadsheet, but in the human heart. He looked at me, and the feigned warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard respect. The rest of the meeting was a formality. We tore up the old term sheet. We drafted a new one, a partnership, not a conquest. I didn't destroy him. I neutralized him. I had used his own weapons to force a truce. This is the ultimate lesson of psychological warfare. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You don't have to be the most aggressive. You just have to be the one who understands what is not being said. Power isn't about giving great speeches. It's about asking the one question that makes everyone else in the room fall silent. It's about controlling the flow of information, making others reveal their cards while you keep yours held close. It's about being the calm center while they are lost in the emotional storm you've created. Here's how you never get played again. Learn to be the interrogator. Stop offering up your vulnerabilities as a gesture of goodwill. Instead, study the people across the table. Listen to their stories, not for what they say, but for what they betray about their needs, their fears, and their pride. Use questions not to connect, but to probe. Let them believe you are harmless. Let them underestimate you. And then, at the moment of maximum leverage, ask the question that reveals you've understood the game better than they have all along. Was this a cold, manipulative strategy? Or was it simply the language of power? A language you must learn to speak if you don't want to spend your life as a pawn in someone else's victory? Drop your take in the comments. Was Machiavelli a cold-blooded cynic or just a ruthless realist? If this resonates with you, and you are ready to stop being a character in someone else's story, hit subscribe. This is the place for minds that aren't looking for fairy tales. We're just here for the truth.